kick us off. Well, this is, I guess, a hybrid event, so welcome both to those in the room and to those watching on Zoom or perhaps later on by video. And welcome to our event From Pledges to Progress, Decarbonizing Today to Meet Tomorrow's Ambition. I'm Nat Keohane, the president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, or C2ES. We, if you don't know us, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating the transition to a thriving net zero economy. And we do that by working with businesses across the entire U.S. economy, including the nearly 40 Fortune 500 companies in our Business Environmental Leadership Council, to catalyze their actions, but also help them drive the kind of policies they'll need to reach their commitments. So today, in this session, we're going to look at the electric power sector, and in particular how two major utilities, and I think Sheri is coming, will be joining us virtually, how two major utilities and a major manufacturing company are helping accelerate that transition to a carbon-free electric future. For those of you, for a little bit of context, electricity is still the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S., although there's been enormous strides in the sector, cutting emissions 40% below 2005 levels by 2020. So lots of progress has already been made, but much more needs to take place if we're going to meet net zero across the economy. And I think about that, and I know many people do, in two phases. In the next 10 years, we've got to deploy as much as we can of the increasingly low-cost, renewable energy, zero-carbon energy, just to build out demand and help decarbonize the grid. And then in that second phase, from 2030, we're going to need new technologies that can provide 24/7 power, whether that's advanced nuclear or hydrogen or carbon capture or long-term duration storage or other technologies that's still being developed. And all of that we have to do against the backdrop of building a more resilient grid to the impacts that communities are already seeing from climate change, and building a grid that can integrate all those renewables, and building a grid that can accommodate increased demand as we electrify transportation and industry and other sectors in order to get to that net zero. And of course, we do all of that against the backdrop of the increasing urgency we're seeing every day in communities all across the country and all across the world with the impacts of climate change. Implementing these kinds of targets and carrying out what I just described in terms of that transition to zero is not only going to require really deep and strong commitments from the private sector, but also policies being put in place by policymakers in Washington and at the state level and indeed throughout the world. We saw good news over the weekend with the infrastructure framework being passed, which has tens of billions of dollars for clean energy, including a cleaner grid and vehicle electrification. And now we all are looking at Congress as it considers the Build Back Better framework, which would put $555 billion more into clean energy and climate investments over the next 10 years. So those policies will be vital to helping achieve the goals for the power sector and for the economy as a whole. So that's some context for the discussion. We've got a great panel coming up. But first, I want to introduce it to Ralph Izzo, Chairman and CEO of PSEG, who's been a real leader, both the company and Ralph himself, on climate and clean energy. And Ralph will give keynote remarks. Ralph, thanks so much.
Thank you, Nat. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a struggle to decide whether or not the fact that Nat and I agree on so many things and say the same things, whether that's a helpful reinforcement of a message or a redundant and boring overlay. So I'll let you decide. So who's PSEG? We serve about a little bit more than 2 million customers in New Jersey, a little bit more than 1 million customers in Long Island, in part of New York State, and a little under 2 million gas customers in New Jersey. So we're a regulated electric and gas utility. And I'd like to describe for you PSEG's ambition for the future. Before I do that, though, I do a little bit of audience participation. It's just one question. And that question is as follows. How many folks woke up this morning saying, I can't wait to use a kilowatt hour? Okay. That's typically the answer I get, and I don't think it's because people aren't paying attention. It's because nobody in their right mind wakes up in the morning saying, I can't wait to use a kilowatt hour. Now, you may have thought, I can't wait to see a certain television program tonight You may be grateful that we're not sitting here in the dark. I'm grateful that we have an air exchange unit here that's trying to create a little bit of a cool feeling. So we all want to do things that rely on electricity. But I think we would all be a lot happier if we could do those things and use a lot less electricity. So feature number one of our ambition of the future is massive investment in energy efficiency. The kilowatt hour that's unused is the cleanest kilowatt hour possible. Sadly, it doesn't get the attention of so many other things. It's just hard to have a massive groundbreaking ceremony with famous people around a programmable thermostat. But depending upon what institution you listen to, the ability to reduce energy consumption per unit, you fill in the blank, capita per unit GDP, can be up to 25% versus business as usual, certainly in the United States. So that's our number one criteria. Let's use less. Our second criteria then is you can't use less to the point where you don't use anything. So what you want to use has to be cleaner than ever before. Now, cleaner than ever before has made progress over time. It started with fine particulate matter, it then went on to SO2 and NOx and mercury and various other pollutants. But now let's face it, it means carbon dioxide. But before you can make progress, you have to secure the present. And at least in the United States, over 50% of our carbon-free energy is provided by nuclear power, and current nuclear plants are at risk of premature closing due to imperfections in the market. And I'll talk about that number one imperfection in a few minutes. So it makes no sense to have nuclear plants close, as they have in some countries, and replace it with lignite or replace it with natural gas and hope that non-dispatchable renewables can make up the rest. But once we've secured the base, then we have to do more. In our particular case, doing more is offshore wind, with price points that are dropping precipitously. In other places, it makes sense to do onshore wind, to do solar, whether it's solar collectors or photovoltaics. But clearly, renewable energy is the way to expand going into the future. Maybe in the distant future, advanced nuclear cycles, fuel cycles, or small modular reactors can play a role as well. So once we've started using less, once we've secured the carbon-free supply we have and expanded it, then we need to electrify the economy. And clearly, in the first step, that would be transportation. In the United States, that's now the number one source of carbon emissions. But we shouldn't stop there. And as we continue to electrify the economy, we sadly will have to do some adaptation. Because if people lose power at home today, they're irritated. But in the future, they will lose their ability to communicate. They'll lose their ability to drive their car. They'll lose their ability to work. So a much more resilient grid is essential. Now, how are we supposed to make all of these decisions? When do we invest in energy efficiency? When do we invest in offshore wind versus onshore wind? When do we invest in solar? When do we invest in advanced nuclear? How much more should we solidify the grid? The only way to determine that intelligently, in my point of view, is a price on carbon. A price on carbon that gives meaningful direction to consumers, to investors on what choices to make. The second and final part of my quiz before I wrap up is, in my home state, New Jersey, and for those of you who are from the United States, don't think that New Jersey is the only place that's a little bit messed up in this regard. I'm sure I can give an analogous question as to where you live. What is the value of carbon that the state of New Jersey imparts? Is it $400 per ton? Is it $100 per ton? Is it $17 per ton? Or is it negative $125 per ton? And I'm being a bit snarky. I didn't give you the right answer. The right answer is all the above. Because when we invest in energy efficiency, we can literally save customers $125 per ton of carbon avoided. When we keep our existing nuclear plants alive, we can do that for $17 per ton. Our investments in offshore wind cost about $100 per ton. And the number one source of carbon-free energy that is other than nuclear in New Jersey today is rooftop solar at $400 per ton, which makes no sense from the point of view of a New Jersey consumer. What are we doing at PSEG? We're investing $1 billion in the next 3 years in energy efficiency. That's a factor of 10 increase over what we historically spend. We own 25% of a 1.1 gigawatt wind farm. The lead developer is Ørsted, the world's leading owner-operator of offshore wind. We've invested over $1.5 billion in solar energy. And most importantly, we avoid 13 million tons of carbon every year by operating our existing nuclear plants. So that's our hope for the future. Use less. What you use is cleaner. We use it everywhere in the economy, and we have a grid that's so resilient that that economy hums along as never before. So I thank you for your time and attention. I think I turn it back over to you, Nat, and then maybe right to Brian. Okay.
Thank you, Ralph. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Wolff. I'm Executive Vice President for Policy at the Edison Electric Institute. We represent about 70% of all global electricity customers in the world, both domestic membership and global membership that we have. I want to introduce our panelists first. You've got introduced to Ralph. He needs no introduction, but Caroline Choi, she's the Senior Vice President of Edison and International for Corporate Affairs. And also we have us joining virtually Sheri Hickok, and she is the CEO of GE Renewable and Onshore Wind. So Sheri, Caroline, thanks for joining us. I want to give both of you an opportunity to say some opening remarks, and then we'll get to a good discussion.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, when we think about from pledges to progress, decarbonizing today, we at Edison International do have a net zero carbon goal. It mirrors that of the state of California. So by 2045, we'll be at net zero and and we're focused in on our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions as we figure out what we can do in that space. From pledges, we have to have a plan, and so one of the things that we've done at Edison and at Southern California Edison, our main subsidiary, is to focus in on what is a roadmap for the state of California to achieve its carbon goals, 100% renewable energy, and then leveraging that in other parts of the economy to make sure that we hit the 2030 target that the state has for 40% below 1990 emission levels, and then of course net zero by 2045. So 2 years ago, in 2019, we put out a paper called Pathway to 2045, and that was to help the state figure out what is the most cost-effective way to achieve those goals. And it's very similar to what Ralph just talked about for the state of New Jersey. It is 100% green energy, and then leveraging that in more aspects of the economy, particularly in transport and in buildings. And then just last month, we put out a paper, Mind the Gap, which focused back on 2030, because it's really critical that California achieve those 2030 goals in order to ensure that it can stay on the path to achieve net zero by 2045, carbon neutrality. And right now, as much as California has done, and they've done an incredible job, we've averaged about 1% a year in carbon reductions, even as the state has grown by 3% a year. So it's really an incredible accomplishment. But between now and 2030, we have to actually reduce emissions by 4% a year in order to achieve the 40% below 1990 level. So a really significant chore ahead of us. But it can be done because the technology is here in California and elsewhere to achieve it. And at Edison, you know, we go from our plans to the programs that we're going to invest in to help the state achieve those goals and help our customers make clean energy choices. That starts with things like energy efficiency, as Ralph was mentioning. We're also doing a lot in the clean energy choices space. So we have rooftop solar programs, particularly for our customers in disadvantaged communities. We have to make sure that as California moves ahead towards a clean energy economy, that they're doing it in a way that ensures that no communities are left behind. So our rooftop solar programs tend to focus really on the low-income customers in disadvantaged communities, where we provide an incentive for them. The state of California, for the investor-owned utilities, it's $10 million a year through 2030 to help those customers be able to put rooftop solar on their homes. There's also a separate program for multi-family affordable housing, so for even tenants to be able to enjoy the benefits of rooftop solar by having a program that goes after the owners of those buildings to install rooftop solar on those buildings. Secondly is in electrification of vehicles. The state has programs, of course, to incent customers to go into an electric vehicle. Our programs are focusing again on the disadvantaged community, low-income customer. We have a $1,000 rebate for used vehicles for both the first owner, the second owner, and the third owner of that used vehicle. To help move EVs into the more low and moderate income communities. We also do a lot of marketing to raise awareness of customers to be knowledgeable of the number of vehicles that are out there and how to get into one, and also to make them aware of other programs that the state offers. We used to offer a rebate for new vehicles, but the state took over that program, so the California Clean Fuels Reward Program, which is actually at the point of sale. It's a great program. We heard a lot from our dealers that in order to have a customer choose to get into an electric vehicle when they're on the lot, point of sale rebate was really important. And so that just got started this year. And we're really enthusiastic about the opportunities that may help get customers into those vehicles. So those are just some of the things that we're doing as we go from pledges to plans to programs to ensure that our communities are able to achieve the goals and that the state of California also is able to stay on track to 2030 and achieve the goals towards 2045. So thanks.
Sheri, you've got a huge portfolio representing both Europe, China, Latin America, Africa. Tell us a little bit about what GE is up to, particularly in the onshore wind space. That's a huge portfolio and I'm sure brings about a lot of challenges working in different regions of the world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. And firstly, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I wish I was there live, but unfortunately, and maybe I'll just do a sound check. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I wish I was there live with you, but we are working hard on getting more wind turbines installed. So I'm currently in our Paris office where I'm located and our international operations is led out of. As you noted, we do have a very large footprint, and I'm pleased to be here today representing GE, and GE has been around COP26 for the last week. And I'm pleased to be here because as a company with such scale and breadth of what we do, generating 1/3 of the powers of the world's power electricity, and really being part of 90% of equipping the power transmission around the world, we really believe we can help on this journey. And we absolutely agree and see climate change as an urgent global priority that we all must engage in. And we'll talk a little bit through some of the Q&A today around how we're doing that, both through our own actual footprint and optimizing that through our own generation. You know, I think, Ralph, you said it well, a kilowatt, the cleanest kilowatt is a kilowatt that's not used. And we're using our lean tools to really bring more efficiency into what we do, from how we operate our facilities to how we develop our products. And then the second place that we as GE really can even make a bigger impact is by the products we're actually developing for the world. So representing 50% of the wind installs for GE onshore, I can tell you that we are very focused on how do we make those more and more efficient, from the size of those wind turbines to how we install them more efficiently, which ultimately drives down the levelized cost of electricity. And when we look at the amount of demand, and I know we'll spend some time on this today, that is generating not just in the US, but it's really that same piece is being replicated around the world. Our challenge is how do we continue to do this more efficiently and faster? Because if you really look at the goals that have been set and communicated here at COP26 by countries around the world, the speed at which we are installing renewables will not keep the pace. It will not allow us to achieve the goals that we have. Not even talking yet about grid stability, not talking about transportation, not talking about the inflationary environment, but this is literally just around how much we're able to install per month, per year right now. So I'm excited to spend some time talking through that. And GE is very proud and pleased to be a part of this journey and hopefully really be a leader with all of you on this journey.
Thanks, Sheri. We'll be right back to you in a few minutes. I just wanted to point out that, Ralph, when you and PSEG did your sustainability and climate report, I was reading through it last night, and I noticed that, you know, your commitment for 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind as well. I know you've been working with Governor Murphy on that too, but can you talk about that a little bit and talk about maybe some of the things that you all are having to address? I know with probably transmission and other issues, but could you highlight that for us? Because I remember when he just actually left the room, but when Michael J. Bradley did the analysis of, you know, you all were one of the only utilities actually that had the smallest carbon footprint. And when you all put together the report, you know, it really had to be something that could be a plan in action, you know, over time. And so I wanted you to talk about that wind commitment particularly.
Thanks, Brad. Is this working? So New Jersey has two laws on the books. One says that we'll reduce our carbon by 80% by 2050 from where it was 2005. and we'll have electricity be 100% carbon-free by 2050. So we run nuclear power plants, but putting the on button was a little bit of a challenge there, so not to worry. So Governor Murphy has pledged to build 7,500 gigawatts of offshore wind, and so far contracts have been issued for over 3 gigawatts of offshore wind. I should have said 7,500 megawatts. No. So 7.5 gigawatts, 7,500 megawatts, and half of that, a little bit under half of that's already been contracted. And we have the rights to one of those projects and are talking about the rights to a second of those projects. That has precipitated the need to build an offshore wind transmission grid, which PJM is currently reviewing with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. We submitted 9 projects to help facilitate that, and we are 9 out of 80 projects that have been bid. It will be a 10-figure investment for the state of New Jersey to build that transmission system going into the future. New Jersey gets 40% of its electricity from nuclear, so we are well on our way to being a low carbon leader. It's 90% of the carbon-free energy in this state. So for us, at least, the sustainability report that you mentioned, Brian, for us to hit net zero by 2030, it's not really a big deal. The reason why it has to be net zero for us on scope 1 and scope 2 is that our line losses cannot be avoided, our transmission line losses, and we're connected to PJM. And it's very doubtful that PJM will be 100% carbon-free by 2030. So unless we put superconducting wire in the sky, which we're not going to do, we need to offset that component of our scope 1 and 2. The bigger challenge for us, which is what led us to join the Race to Zero and the 1.5 degree coalition that's here, is scope 3. And that's going to be a combination of methane reduction from leaky pipes, energy efficiency, some fueling with hydrogen, and then some questioning about, okay, so what do we do with carbon capture and storage? All those need to be done. I'm sorry for going on so long. Our primary investment in transmission, the pre-offshore wind grid, has been about adaptation. The day of reckoning for us was Superstorm Sandy back in October of 2012, when we literally lost 1.8 of our 2 million customers in the span of a half hour. But over the years, we've made such improvements that when Superstorm or when Tropical Storm Ida came through, we had a de minimis amount. I think we lost about 100,000 customers. So we literally went from 90% customer loss to 5% customer loss because we did some high-tech things like lifting our transformers off the ground and picking equipment up by 6 to 12 inches. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but that's all that needed to be done. So storm hardening is not a major challenge. Governor Murphy won re-election last week, so I am absolutely convinced that by the time he finishes his second and final term, that we will have commitments for 7.5 gigawatts in New Jersey.
That's awesome. Well, Keohane, you actually referenced pathways, but you also did a report, Mind the Gap, and Nat rightfully pointed out that in the bipartisan infrastructure package, there's about $7.5 billion with regards to EV charging, EV infrastructure. Generally, you have a large public transportation investment as well. But talk about when I looked at Mind the Gap and I was reading through all the different components of it, it was interesting to me how you all had set that out just to be able to say, we got to clean up the grid. That's first and foremost, and then electrify everything possible. So talk about how you've sort of addressed that and, being such a leader in electric transportation, how you're looking at that as far as an overall plan, because that's been years in the making to get to this point.
It has. It's interesting. The utilities aren't known for moving very quickly, and neither are our commissions. So it's going to be a challenge as we move to 2030 for the utility to move quickly, as well as our commissions to make the decisions more quickly, so that we can implement in a timely way to stay on track to 2030. For electric vehicles, we've been at it for a number of years, and I think we have the largest, if not one of the largest, utility EV programs in the country, about $800 million that's going towards charging infrastructure we call make-ready charging infrastructure across passenger vehicles, medium and heavy duty. And make-ready means that we put in the infrastructure all the way up to the panel, including a panel upgrade, and the make-ready infrastructure so a charger can go there for our customers. The customer actually owns the charger. They can pick among a number of chargers that are approved in the program across a number of charging companies, whether that's EVgo or Charge Ready or Electrify America. They pick the rates that they charge on those chargers, but we make the investment paid for by our customers, socialized across our customer base, to help them adopt electric vehicles. The passenger vehicle charging infrastructure is going into primarily places we have what we call long dwell time, so where people are workplaces, schools, parks, universities, where people can park for a number of hours and charge. Our medium and heavy duty are going into commercial industrial applications, really focusing a lot at the Port of Long Beach. Port of Long Beach is our biggest customer, and they have some goals themselves as we talk about climate in the state to go towards zero emission in their operations. So we're working with the Port of Long Beach in particular to help move them in that direction. But it's really also just, again, raising awareness of our customers, so engaging particularly with our business customers about the availability of this program, the availability of vehicles that they can order. Transit is a classic example of that. We have a number of transit agencies that are moving towards zero. They had adopted natural gas, now moving towards zero emission transit. The bipartisan infrastructure package will give dollars to help those transit agencies buy electric vehicles, and then we will be putting the charging infrastructure in to help them charge those buses. The buses actually is a great resource because they'll charge early, go out in the mornings, and they can charge in the middle of the day when it's less busy, and then go back out in the evening. So it's a really great resource, we think. And so leveraging that zero carbon energy in the middle of the day, because currently we have excess energy in California that we're sharing with our neighbors. They're very happy to have in Arizona, Nevada, and elsewhere. But we'd like to use that energy at home, and so the more that we can electrify and the more quickly we can electrify, the better.
Sheri, I just wanted to point out something, because in the states with the bipartisan infrastructure package, we also had $73 billion with regard to grid modernization, and that was really about the integration of so many renewables, right, and how we were going to address that as far as the grid was concerned. With such a diverse portfolio that you have as far as onshore wind, what do you look at as kind of the biggest challenges that GE has in, everywhere from Europe to China to Latin America, just these different markets? How do you view that as far as the integration of wind, and probably my guess is you have the same issue that we have with both offshore wind as well with regard to transmission challenges?
That's right. And I think, what's interesting is I might step back and say, even before we get to the grid, there's some things around wind, and I can talk a bit more broadly across our renewables portfolio also, as we have hydro, we have grid, we have blade manufacturing, we have solar integration, and our on and offshore wind. But there are real challenges that we're focused on helping our customers and the governments around the world work through. And the first, I'd say, it just starts off with innovation in general. So, wind has really only been heavily innovating for about 10 years now. And you can see how quickly the systems are just ramping up, meaning the pull on what we actually want out of wind turbine development and the amount of electricity we want versus the time that we've actually been developing. I actually come out of an automotive background where I spent 22 years with a company you will all know from the US named General Motors. But in that company, I learned very much about platforming, about looking at common part usage, about how to drive quality into the supply base. And wind in its infancy has not yet been able to pull on and integrate many of the things we could be learning from other more mature industries to really help us develop and innovate at a faster pace. Because remember, the piece that makes the wind turbine most efficient is how large it is effectively. How much wind can you touch with your blades? How big are those blades? And that's why you see offshore just really accelerating that size. but onshore also with some blades being announced in the 170 meter rotor diameter, 180 meter rotor diameter. If you've ever seen one of these move down your highway, you quickly start to realize like these are mind blowing. So one is, how do we continue to learn from other industries so we can move faster as we want to deploy more renewables in a safe way, in a high quality way? Because every one of you, and I know all the utilities and our customers and governments that are investing want 20-year, 30-year, even 40-year lives for these turbines. So it's really, really important that we keep the innovation going and the investments there. The second around the grids, and we see this around the world, and you asked this, Brian, around what are some of the challenges? The way we permit around the world, the way the grid is working around the world, the approval processes varies substantially. Yet we want to try to use common platforms of wind turbines because of the very high cost to develop. So the more that we can start to stabilize some of these expectations and the speed at permitting that we can get done within a country, across a larger group of countries, really around the world, is very valuable. In a country, I'll just give you one example, such as Sweden, who has developed and invested in significant and large wind farms. It can take up to 10 years to permit a farm from the time they identify where the farm location will be to the time we actually get electricity on the grid. Think about that, 10 years. Where do we want our goals in 2030? We don't have time. We just do not have time. So the permitting processes need to be simplified, and the more we can commonize, the better, because that is what I would call, in a lot of ways, waste in the system as we create different applications, different methodologies around every country around the world, or even just for some of our customers. And then you said it, on grid. We know the grid requirements are becoming more and more stringent. We need the countries and the governments to be investing in that grid infrastructure. That is going to be one of the biggest roadblocks, just as you outlined that. And we see, I work a lot with Australia. Australia actually has the most stringent grid approval requirements that we've seen around the world, and we've been operating in that for some time. We can take learnings from what Australia has done and quickly share that. And I think the more we can learn from each other around the world, across our customers and our governments, the faster we'll actually be able to reach what I believe is actually a common goal for all of us.
That's a great point, Sheri. I just want to switch gears because Ralph, in the sustainability report that you all did, you also identified something that was very critical and that you actually rely on and talk about a lot, which is policy. And the Build Back Better legislation that is currently pending in Congress actually has something that's very important to you, which is the nuclear production tax credit. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that. It's not as much as we wanted, but it certainly sends a signal, and I want to know what that signal means to you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It is a critical component, as are the other production tax credits. So the largest regional power market in the U.S. is PJM, and if you just think about the way in which that power pool works, it dispatches power on the basis of short-run marginal cost. So if you're a fossil fuel generator and there's no price on carbon, you're able to understate your costs. Your fuel looks pretty inexpensive. You get natural gas from the Marcellus Shale, the Utica Shale. So you can actually run a 6,500 heat rate power plant with $2 gas, and it looks like it's only cost $13 a megawatt hour to operate. Well, that's way below nuclear power prices from the point of view of nuclear having a big labor component. So nuclear loses to fossil fuels because of the absence of a price on carbon. At the other end of the spectrum are renewables, who suffer the same problem against fossil fuels because of the absence of a price. But to fix that, what we've done for renewables is we've signed long-term power purchase agreements, usually mandated by a renewable portfolio standard in the state. So the renewable entity has an out-of-market payment. The offshore wind farm that we're building gets guaranteed $98 per megawatt hour with a 2% escalator per year. Now, once that wind farm is built and getting guaranteed $98 per megawatt hour, it bids its short-run marginal cost, which is zero. So the nuclear plant sits there, and is up against fossil fuel that's getting a buy on the fact that it doesn't have to pay a price on carbon, and it sits there against offshore wind that looks like it costs zero, but it's really getting paid $98. Well, you're getting hit on each side of the head by a 2x4. So what Congress is proposing to do to preserve 50% of America's carbon-free energy, and in my case, 90% of New Jersey's carbon-free energy, is giving a production tax credit that says if your energy revenues are below $25 per megawatt hour, then you're eligible for a $15 production tax credit. And every dollar of market revenue you get above 25, then that tax credit is reduced by 80 cents. So that means that basically nuclear has to survive at $40 a megawatt hour, which I believe it can. And if that can keep the existing fleet operating while we continue to do the types of things that we know we need to do in terms of building more offshore wind, building more solar. We're buying GE turbines, by the way, Sheri. So that would be a great thing. Unfortunately, it's only 8 years. And for capital-intensive industries that you sometimes have to make major capital investments, I wish it would be longer, but counting on the fact that these things do get renewed. So it's a critically important and often undiscussed part of Build Back Better. Thanks, Brian.
Well, I want to kind of bring back Nat's remark with regards to resilience, which is also a component of the infrastructure package that passed last week. And I know that for you, Ralph, you brought up Superstorm Sandy, Ida. You know, we're seeing these, the constant barrage, it seems like, of extreme events that are not just weather, wildfires, what have you. Caroline, I want you to talk about that too. But if the three of you could talk about resilience and particularly in your footprint and how you're looking at that, because, from the utility side, you're always capital intensive, so that's always part of the plan. But how will you think about, working with the government, maybe using and deploying some of those dollars? I know they come in the form of grants. But talk about resilience in your footprint and what that means.
Yeah. It's a great question, Brian, particularly as we think ahead, and the use of electricity in more sectors of the economy means that electricity has to become increasingly more reliable, and it already has a 99% reliability factor. So, but at the end of the day, you can't afford to not have electricity if more and more of the economy is counting on it. And resilience, particularly as we think about the adaptation side of climate, is particularly important. In California, as you mentioned, we've seen not so much the storms that Ralph has experienced in the east, we're seeing it in the form of wildfire. And we've just had continued record years of wildfire in the state of California. Some of those are started by electrical utility equipment, about 10%. That's been the historic trend, with 90% of it actually caused by other factors, lightning, natural causes, and people. And we're also seeing more people move into the high fire risk areas of California. It tends to be the lower cost areas for home ownership, and even home rentals. So the more people that are in these high fire risk areas, the higher risk of fire starting. As we invest in the grid, we're doing things particularly to harden the grid. We're doing some undergrounding in high fire risk area, but most of it we're doing in the form of insulated wire, where in Southern California, the highest risk of a fire starting off of our equipment is a blow-in, because of the Santa Ana winds that blow in generally the fourth quarter of the year. They can have gusts up to 80 miles per hour or even greater. And so you'll see palm fronds and branches blow into our wires, balloons. One year we had a trampoline blow into the wire. So by insulating the wire, when something blows into the wire, it doesn't create a spark that can then start a fire. So we're investing billions of dollars a year under our wildfire mitigation plan that the Commission requires of all three investor-owned utilities to cover conductor. We're also just increasing our situational awareness. So we have put weather stations across the high fire risk area in Southern California, Edison service area. About 25% of the service area is in high fire risk area. And those cameras, those weather stations monitor the humidity, temperature. We also have folks out in the field that are monitoring the humidity, like the fuel moisture content. And so all these things to help ensure that we are prepared for the risk of wildfire. And then beyond that, as we think about clean energy and electrification, we're investing in grid modernization, because the grid does have to become a more modern two-way grid to accommodate all the uses that customers will have, and the ability of devices, distributed energy resources, to provide grid services to ensure reliability of the system. And we see more opportunities for that coming along, whether it's from EVs or from rooftop solar and storage. And so that's another opportunity as we invest in grid modernization to have customers be part of the solution towards that clean energy economy.
So this is a critically important issue, Brian, and it's been compounded by COVID, and I'll make the connection for you in a moment. So we've invested probably on average $2.5 billion a year improving the reliability of the high voltage system. Because when you do that, the cost per customer benefit is pretty small, right? A transmission line goes out and tens of thousands of customers are affected. A substation goes out, tens of thousands of customers are affected. And thus we've seen the difference between Superstorm Sandy and Tropical Storm Ida. Where we have not invested has been in the low voltage system into the house. And as I said before, when people used to go to the office or wherever they worked and they came home and their power was out, they were cranky about having to reset the clock on the microwave. But now, and increasingly post-COVID, people will be working from home. And they're not just going to be cranky. You've impaired their ability to work. And if they were charging their car, they may not be able to get in their car. And if they want to call someone and they're on the red bar instead of 50% charge, they may not be able to call someone. So you've really made a mess. We serve Newark Airport. I assure you, the level of reliability we've designed for the system into Newark Airport is different than the level of reliability we've designed into my home. Yet, this past year, there were 3 of us working full-time in my home. So that last mile is the next area that investments will have to be made. I haven't fully explored the capability of investor-owned utilities to take advantage of Build Back Better, but I am sure that there'll be ways that we can make use of the programs in there, if nothing else, to reduce the headroom on the bill so that we can then invest in the low-voltage system to give it the kind of resiliency it needs. The worst storms are those that are fast and come through quick, and the next day the sun is shining. And people want to know, why isn't my power back? And they just somehow don't see the massive tree that's in their driveway that knocked down all of the wires into the home. So customer's always right, and we need to make that grid much more reliable, much more resilient. And I do think that there will be resources available in Build Back Better, whether they can be directly used for the last mile or can free up room. I'm sure we'll make use of that.
Well, Ralph, I'm going to bring up the sort of the last question here and an observation too, is that, you and I both shared frustration of not really getting climate policy across the finish line. We got close, but no cigar again, and that's been twice now since Waxman-Markey and that program back in 2009. And this clean energy payment program that we were actually advocating for is a missed opportunity. And you and I talked about that earlier, but I just wanted to ask you, what really does the tax credits that in Build Back Better, $550 billion of tax credit, and that's going to mainly cause an acceleration, but what do you anticipate that to be? Because when you did your sustainability and climate report, you didn't have those, you didn't know they were coming, and you didn't know that you would be able to preserve your nuclear fleet. That was in question. So both of you talk about what do those tax credits mean to you and the certainty, but also how much is it going to help you get to that part of the program that you're wanting to get over the finish line to net zero?
Yeah, I'm sure Carol and Sheri can contribute to that, but the production tax credits, for example, New Jersey's first tranche of offshore wind cleared at $98 per megawatt hour. The second tranche cleared at, I think it was $88 per megawatt hour, and production tax credits can help bring down the price of offshore wind as we continue to build the supply chain. Those production tax credits will make it easier for people to earn their cost of capital and charge customers less. And that's phenomenally important, right? So all of these production tax credits will be helpful in terms of lowering the cost of renewable energy. The problem, Brian, as you know, is that nowadays in the United States, strictly because shale gas is less expensive than coal, and for no other reason, electricity production is the number 2 source of carbon. The number 1 source is transportation. Buildings are a significant part of carbon. We need an economy-wide price on carbon. I know I said it earlier, that if we make the electric utility system carbon-free and then we electrify the economy, that will help get us where we need to go. But if we really want to get there quickly, we need to have people making the decision. Should I change this agricultural practice, or should I build this nuclear plant? One might be a heck of a lot cheaper than the other. So an economy-wide price on carbon added to these production tax credits is really what we need to do.
Yeah, I would say that the Build Back Better and the BIP are sort of complementary policies that help with climate. But at the end of the day, you need this overarching policy that's setting the direction, right? So in California, we have this goal that sets the direction, and then you have cap and trade, and you have a renewable portfolio standard, and you have energy efficiency and solar programs, and all these things that align to the goal. And I think that's what we're missing in the United States, is that overarching commitment to the target that then puts us all in the right direction. So the production tax credits are vitally important, as are the dollars that are going in for infrastructure and the grants that are going to be available to states to help, at the end of the day, make this a more affordable transition to a clean energy economy. All really, really important. But at the end of the day, we really need that North Star to target. And it's really disappointing, as you said, Brian, that we didn't get it, except would just be another policy at the end, but electricity sector, the energy sector is a critically important part, and is a base, I think, foundational to achieving so much more that we're trying to achieve in the country.
Sheri, we're going to give you the last word.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Well, I will just echo what's already been said here, and maybe I add one more thing. In addition, having this long-term North Star and alignment on where we're going, what that will also do, whether it's for the grid or the innovation that needs to happen to continue to drive the cost of electricity down, is we need that long-term commitment so that we get the right investments to drive innovation. There is so much innovation that can happen, but I will tell you, the cost of capital to be invested here is so high that without that long-term commitment and people knowing what they're going to be able to do, sell for, how they're going to be able to turn this investment into a return in, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, you just won't get there, and you won't get the people to step out on that. So that's one. And I just, repeat maybe where we started, and it might be a good way to wrap it. I think we all agree that climate change is probably one of the most urgent global priorities that we have in front of us today. And it's clear all three of us and the companies represented are taking on that challenge. We are here to support and work with our customers and the governments around the world to deliver affordable, sustainable, and resilient accessible electricity, and that can only be done by working together across the broad system to make that happen. And just the last point, that I fully agree that success will rely on policies that drive lower emissions requirements to force everybody moving in that same direction. And I like, Caroline's point on the funneling kind of strategy on how we set that up. So I think we're all in violent agreement on this, but we need to get the ducks lined up in a row so we can start moving forward very, very quickly.
That's a good point, Sheri. Well, today's panel is entitled Pledges to Progress. I think you all heard from our panelists, not only the commitment, but the accountability that's there in order to reach and exceed their plans. And we talked about some of the vehicles to be able to accelerate progress today. So I want to thank you all, and also thank our virtual audience as well for joining us, and hope you enjoy the rest of your COP.